I am so delighted to be here with you all and to spend the next hour talking about this very important topic from the Gottman research. And I'm going to jump right in. So, the topic today is the Four Horsemen and their antidotes. And in order to understand what that is, right, let's start by just talking about conflict. So we believe, and this has been proven through relationship research, that conflict is inevitable, right? That it's normal and healthy to have conflict in your relationship. Not everybody has conflict at the same level. So certainly it makes sense that some of you are going to have conflict that's much more passionate, much more kind of, knockout, drag out kind of conflict maybe. And some of you are going to have conflicts that are very low key, that may be more of a Cold War or more of, the two of you kind of having a little spat and then you get away from each other. Either way, conflict is going to happen in relationships because two different people are coming together to form this relationship. And because of that, you're going to rub each other the wrong way about something, right? It could be about how you squeeze the toothpaste from the bottom or the middle. That's a famous fight that a lot of couples have, right? Or it could be about how you load the dishwasher. But it could also be about much serious things like what you believe about children. Do you want to have children? How do you parent children? What do you believe about religion? And then in this day and age, there could be a lot of conflicts related to what's going on in our country, what's going on in our society, what's going on with the pandemic around the planet and what we should be doing, right? Those are all conversations that we get into with our spouses and partners that can go off the rails. So conflict is whenever something just goes off the rails. So when you have conflict, it turns out what you say and how you say it when you're in that conflict is crucial. That is what makes the difference, right? You can create safety in conflict, or you can create an environment that's corrosive and slowly dissolves trust. So what I tell people is, it's sort of like you want to send your partner a gift, right? Imagine that you want to send them a nice vase made of beautiful crystal, and you go to UPS. You don't show up with the vase and just throw it on the table and say, yeah, send this to my partner. Because you know what's going to happen is the vase is going to show up at your partner's house in smithereens, right? So what do? You take bubble wrap and you go find the best styrofoam peanuts and you stuff it and you pack it and you wrap it, and then you put another wrapping on top of it and you take it very gingerly and you put all over the package, fragile, 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 right? And what are you trying to do? You're saying it's not enough to just get the vase to my partner or spouse. I want it to show up complete. I want it to show up in its original form without being broken, without being tampered with. Communication is exactly the same way. When we are communicating with our partners and spouses, 90% of the time or better, we have something important to say. And we want to be heard. We want our partner to understand what we're saying. We want them to hear exactly what we're saying. So this packaging that we put around our communication turns out to be absolutely crucial, absolutely important in terms of how we manage to succeed in our communication. So that's what this is all about, right? So this concept of the Four Horsemen comes from the research of Doctors John and Julie Gottman, okay? They are researchers, relationship researchers. You may have heard about them already. Dr. John Gottman began researching relationships in 1972. So he's been at it for the last 40 plus years, right? And his wife, Dr. Julie Schwartz Gottman, is also a psychologist. And after they got married, and initially she wasn't involved in it, but about 10 years in, he began to say to her, oh my gosh, we're finding out all these really amazing, interesting things, because what he was doing was observing couples and really watching what it's like to have a relationship that's healthy and what it's like to have a relationship that doesn't feel so good. And she said to him, what are you doing with all the results? And he said, nothing, I'm writing it up for other academics. And he would say, I was proud to say I'd never helped anybody with my research until my wife came along and said, oh my gosh, there's a gold mine here. There really is such valuable information, and we should create a model. We should create a couples therapy. We should create a couples retreat, and then we should communicate to the public what you're discovering. So she had a huge role to play in setting that up. So the questions that they have explored in their research is, what variables predict divorce? And believe it or not, when Gottman started his research in the 70s, he was actually one of few people, hardly anybody was asking that question. How do we know when a relationship is headed towards dissolution and separation? What an important question that is, right? Are there healthy and distressed relationships, and how are they different, right? Again, believe it or not, he was one of the few researchers that said we should be studying the masters of relationship just as much as we're studying people who are struggling in their relationships. And then what predicts people's adaptation to major life transitions? What makes relationships work well? One of the other questions that's not on here that he also asked is, how do people keep their sense of humor, right? If they're in a relationship that has conflict, how do they manage to keep their sense of humor? And it turns out he found out that that's pretty important, actually. So coming back here, these are what he called the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. He titled it that because these were 4 specific ways in which we communicate during conflict that destabilizes the conversation. And if we communicate this way all the time, it destabilizes the relationship as well. And they actually found that within the first 15 minutes of watching a couple in conflict, if these 4 horsemen are present, particularly one, which is called contempt, that there was a very high predictive value for what's going to happen with the relationship. They found over and over again, they actually replicated their results initially across 6 studies and then later on with many other studies. They found that 6 years later, with 94% accuracy, they could predict which couples were going to be together and which ones were not. They were incorrect 6% of the time. But again, that's a very high percentage. No other researcher has been able to achieve that. It turns out that the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which I'm going to go into in more detail, correspond to the fight, flight, or freeze coping strategies. And if you don't know what these are, when your body goes into danger, when it feels like it's in danger, it goes into what we call limbic system coping strategies. This is like the hand model of your brain. Okay, imagine this is your spinal cord right here, down here, and here's the lower part of the brain. And then here is your frontal cortex, your neocortex. This part right here is where your eyes are, right? So right behind your forehead is what's called the prefrontal cortex, which is like your command center for your brain. Well, right underneath that, right in the middle of your brain, is what we call the limbic system. Think of the lower brain as your reptilian brain. This pretty much does basic things like breathing, sleeping, eating, hiding, hibernating, those kinds of things. The mouse brain is your mammalian brain. I call it the mouse brain. And the mammalian brain has some basic coping strategies, and that's basically the fight, flight, or freeze. Often the freeze goes into the reptilian, but this can do some of that too. And then the human brain is what grew around it and on top of it. So when you're in conflict and you're feeling like the conversation is dangerous, it's escalating, it's getting, more hot, and you're beginning to feel more agitated, it's like you flip your lid. And when you flip your lid, who's in charge? Mouse brain. And mouse brain is going to go into fight, flight, or freeze. So I'm going to help you see how each of these 4 horsemen actually correspond to those fight, flight, freeze strategies. So in the research, they found that people engaged in these 4 behaviors for a reason. It wasn't like people were being mean or nasty and they were just engaging in this behavior for no good reason. It was that they were actually trying to complain. They were actually trying to stand up for themselves. They were actually trying to say something, but they didn't know how to say it in a way that led to a productive and positive conversation. So often the 4 horsemen, which is on the left side of the screen here, well, my left side, is criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. Think of these as 4 strategies that we use in conflict where we're actually trying to make a legitimate point. We're actually trying to say something. We're trying to stand up for ourselves maybe. And the way we're doing it, if we're using criticism, it's not going to work. So each of these 4 horsemen has an antidote. And I'm going to go through each of these in detail one by one. But just know that if you learn to replace criticism with gentle startup, and defensiveness with taking responsibility. And it's not taking responsibility for everything, for just a small part of the problem. And if you replace contempt with describing your feelings and your needs, then you are going to get much better results out of your conversations. And then replacing stonewalling with physiological soothing. And we'll, again, like I said, I'm going to go through each one of these, okay? So let's start with the first one, criticism. Right. Criticism, it turns out, is the most common. We all do it. They found that when they were observing these couples, even master couples did it. So everybody did it. And it turns out that when we criticize, it's often because we're feeling frustrated. It's often because maybe we've tried to say something a few times and we haven't felt heard. They also found that criticism was the #1 strategy that women tended to use. Now, that's a generalization, so not all women do it, but in their research, more often than not, a woman in a conflict conversation would use criticism. The definition, now each of these are what are called operational definitions. That means they observed the behavior and then they said, how do we describe this pattern that we see over and over and over again? And then what label do we want to put on it? So the pattern they described, they noticed or observed was taking a problem that's in the environment and putting it into the body of your partner, blaming your partner, making your partner feel like it's their fault that something is going on, right? And so I'll give you an example. This is an example I use quite often. I'm about to cook dinner. I hate cooking in a dirty kitchen. So I see my husband sitting at the kitchen table with his face in front of a computer, and I say to him, hey, honey, will you please help me clean up the kitchen? I'm going to run to the grocery store. I'm going to pick up a few items. And when I come back, I want to be able to start dinner. And he goes, yeah, sure. Right. But guess what? His face is buried in the computer. So I go to the grocery store. I come back. I walk into the kitchen. What do you think I see? A dirty kitchen, right? So if I wanted to use criticism, what I would say is, what the heck were you doing this whole time? You make promises you never keep. You never listen to me. You're always saying yes, and then you forget about whatever it is you said. If a dish flew out of the kitchen sink and hit you in the face, you wouldn't know what to do with it. What am I doing? I'm saying this dirty kitchen is your fault. And, I have a legitimate complaint. I asked him if he would do the dishes. He said, yes, he agreed. And then he forgot or something happened, right? So sometimes criticism can also look like I am insulting him or that I'm saying something on purpose, right? That I'm saying you're such a slob or you have a dishwashing defect or something like that, right? I'm actually attacking him. It can also look passive, like I could walk in there and see the dirty kitchen and mutter to myself the whole time that I'm cooking dinner, I'm the only one around here that washes any dishes and nobody else cares about keeping a clean kitchen. I'm the one that's slaving over here. I'm slaving over dinner, and I'm the one that had to go to the grocery store and pick up the groceries. And now I come home and I asked people around here, they're adults, I asked them to help me out and they aren't even helping me out. So what am I doing? I'm talking to myself, but really he's sitting right there and I'm trying to communicate with him, right? And I'm trying to communicate with him in a way that makes him feel bad. And that is often the consequence of using criticism, is that our partners feel bad, like they did something wrong. Instead, what we want to do is learn how to do the gentle startup. This is the antidote. This is about, first of all, being able to be vulnerable within myself. And vulnerable doesn't mean that I'm crying and I feel weak and I'm falling apart. Vulnerable means I allow myself to feel the feelings that come up for me when I walk back into the kitchen and I see a dirty kitchen. Or when I say, hey, I don't want to yell at the kids, and then I listen to my partner yelling at the kids. Or I say, I'm saving this money for holiday next year, and all of a sudden my partner goes and buys this beautiful leather jacket and spends all of the money from the savings account. Whatever it is, it's hurting me. It's impacting me. And so I want to stop and I want to check in with myself and say, what am I really feeling here? What is this? How is this landing on me? So then I use this magic formula, okay? We call it the gentle startup formula. I start with I feel, and since I've checked in with myself, I know what I'm feeling. So I feel frustrated, angry, upset, disappointed, annoyed, let down, lots of feelings, right? I pick one. I feel frustrated when or about, and then I describe the situation. I describe the scene and not the person, right? When I walk into the kitchen and I see a dirty kitchen and I'm not able to start cooking dinner, I feel frustrated. And then I say, I need, and I give my partner a positive request or a positive need. I need you to stop being such a slob is not a positive need. I need you to learn how to be a better listener is not a positive need, right? It's a negative need. What I want to do is give my partner something that he or she can actually do and do without feeling bad. So I might say in this situation, I need you to please put down what you're doing. Come help me right now, because I would like to cook dinner, or I would really like you to clean up after. Okay. So whatever it is, I'm giving him something that he can then do that allows him to feel like he kind of made up for it and that he is able to help me. So the next time you're critical towards your partner, feeling critical, learn to put a pause button. Put a stop before you open your mouth and say something, and ask yourself, what am I feeling? What am I really feeling deep inside? What do I really need? And then you will learn to complain with a gentle start. And it turns out that in couples that had really healthy relationships, when they were able to complain with a gentle startup, almost always their partners were like, oh, I'm so sorry. You're right. I did. I said I'd clean. I didn't. Right? So that leads us to the second horseman. Well, it turns out that if I come into the kitchen and I yell at my partner and call him a slob or say, you never listen and you never do this, then his natural instinct is going to be to get defensive. Nobody wants to be attacked. Nobody wants to be blamed. Nobody likes to hear being called names like slob or dumb or stupid or whatever, right? So defensiveness, it turns out, is a very natural reaction to feeling criticized. And again, when we're being defensive, what they found was that the operational definition was the person doesn't take responsibility for even a small part of the problem. Okay. Defensiveness is an impulsive and reactive mode of responding to a situation or conversation. It turns out if we can learn to be neutral inside our heads for about 30 seconds. So I walk in the kitchen, maybe I'm angry, maybe I get a little critical and I say, what the heck were you doing? Why didn't you blah, 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 blah? And my partner could just be neutral inside his head for 30 seconds. Then what's going to happen is he's going to, first of all, give me a chance to tell my whole sentence. But secondly, he's going to see the piece of what I'm saying that is not wrong. And that's the key, being able to see, being able to listen with an open heart, as it says here, and then being able to respond in a way that says, oh, okay, I see what you mean. But when we're feeling defensive, often we're feeling like the victim, right? We're feeling like somebody is talking down to us, somebody is yelling at us, making us feel bad. And so what we want to do is we want to go, whoa, no, you don't get to do that to me. So defensiveness can look one of two ways. We can either have a righteous, angry response like, oh, I didn't clean the kitchen. When was the last time you did the laundry? If you think I'm such a terrible slob, let me go show you your closet. The last time you reorganized your closet. And honestly, in most relationships, if you've been together for a while, there's going to be things that you can weaponize. Right? You can literally pick up one thing after the other and shoot bullets at each other. And a lot of couples get stuck there. We call that the attack defend loop. Each person feels attacked. Each person's getting defensive. Then this person feels attacked. They get defensive. And it's just like, we are going to circle the wagons right there and feel stuck. We're not going to actually get anywhere. So what is the antidote to defensiveness? It's taking some responsibility, just a little tiny bit, right? Even if I'm being a little critical, if you can say to yourself, what is one thing I can agree with or validate or see as reasonable, right? Doesn't always have to be agree. It could be that I can see the hidden logic in my partner's complaint. And I can respond by saying, you know what, I see that the kitchen is dirty too. Or maybe my partner says, you know, I do remember you saying something about that. And you're right, I don't think I was paying very close attention. Or even more, it could be that my partner says, I know I agreed to wash the dishes, but guess what? As soon as you walked out the door, this really important call came in from work and I had every intention of cleaning the kitchen, but I just couldn't get to it. I may not like that, but I'm not going to see that as a defensive response. It's hard not to get defensive when we're being criticized. It's a lot easier to take responsibility when a partner is using the gentle startup. So, you know, the person who has the complaint uses the gentle startup. The recipient, the receiver, learns to use the antidote for defensiveness. And now the conversation can have a nice positive progression, right? So that's the first two horsemen. Now let's go on to the third, contempt. Okay, contempt is a very particular horseman, okay? It's the nastiest of all four. And it turns out that contempt is the one behavior that we really want to eliminate. We can't eliminate criticism and defensiveness. It's impossible. We wouldn't be human, right? But contempt we can. Contempt was found to be the number one predictor for relationship failure. As a matter of fact, the story goes that John Gottman was going around the country and doing these presentations, and he would go and he would say, we watch these couples, we watch them for an hour, we watch them in conflict, and if we find this and that and the other thing, then we know that this relationship isn't going to make it. 6 years from now, they're more likely to be separated and divorced. And so then he came back and he was talking with his research director, and one of the research team said, you know, I don't think we need an hour. I don't think we need to watch them for an hour. I'll bet you if we watched them for a shorter amount of time, we would still have the same level of predictability. So they began as sort of like that limbo dance, right? How low can you go? They started to get lower and lower. They started to cut it down, watch it, and then predict, and then predict. And they were in the 90s when they got down to half an hour, 20 minutes, 15 minutes. When they got down to the first 3 minutes, this is why we call it a gentle startup. That first 3 minutes of the conversation, right, turns out predicts with over 80% accuracy what the rest of the conversation is going to look like. And what were they looking for? They were looking for the presence of contempt. If contempt showed up in the first 3 to 5 minutes, then chances were that the conversation wasn't going to go very well. Why is that? Because contempt, the operational definition for contempt is when one person takes a superior position in the conversation, when one person talks down to another person. What they're communicating is they don't like them. They dislike their partner. They think they are right. They think they would have made a better decision or have a better idea, right? Contempt is really showing a lack of respect. And contempt, if it goes on and on and on in a relationship, has the potential to become verbal and emotional abuse, okay? Contempt is a very close cousin to that. Now, let me say this. If you think that you recognize contempt in the way you talk to your loved ones, don't feel bad about it. We are all capable of doing that. And it's not like we just decide suddenly one day to be contemptuous. Usually something has happened in the relationship over time that has made one person lose respect for the other person, okay? And so that's the reason that we begin to use disrespectful language. The most obvious ways in which we show contempt is to call somebody names, stupid, Neanderthal, whatever. Another way we do it is by, maligning their background. Say, who raised you? Where did you come from? Your family's like this. Your mom is like this. You're just like your dad. These are all ways in which we talk down to somebody. Another way of showing contempt that is more subtle is if we correct our partner in the middle of whatever they're saying, right? If I was talking and saying the kitchen is dirty and my partner stopped me and said, the kitchen isn't dirty, the kitchen island is cluttered, right? He may be right, but in the moment when I'm trying to express my feelings and my complaint, if he corrects me, I'm gonna feel really triggered. Particularly if you correct somebody's grammar, then you are going to be really triggering them and communicating disrespect. But contempt doesn't have to be verbal. You can communicate contempt even non-verbally through your facial expressions, right? So here's a facial expression that's very common in contempt. Watch my face. If my partner's talking and I'm like, then what I'm communicating is, you're boring me. I don't want to listen to this. You have nothing good to say. I don't care. I don't care what you're saying, right? That sneer. And then if I accompany it with an eye roll, right? As my partner's talking, I go, ugh, right? If I do that, then I'm communicating, I don't respect you. I don't even care what you're saying. Whatever it is you're saying, doesn't have merit, right? So contempt, you can see why contempt would be such a corrosive strategy, corrosive behavior. The other thing they discovered that also explains why contempt is so corrosive is that when there was repeated experiences of contempt in a relationship, the recipient of the contempt had 4 times as many infectious illnesses. Yeah, I think so. I think the correlation was 0.4 in the next year. They would have many more infectious illnesses. And other researchers other than Gottman have actually measured people's bloods and found higher cortisol levels, higher killer cells, a reduction in their immune cells, immunosuppression, because contempt actually wears on our nervous system. It actually makes me on the inside go into a stress response. And so if I'm experiencing contempt over and over and over again, it makes sense that I'm going to start to feel like this is not a safe relationship. This is a dangerous relationship. I probably shouldn't be here anymore. Okay. This is why contempt is such a powerful predictor. But, if you discover or if you think that contempt is something that shows up in your relationship, you can turn it around. You can turn it around no matter how bad it's been. So contempt, like I said, can be a form of abuse. It doesn't always have to be. Sometimes a little sarcasm, a little put down might be a funny, jovial way of saying something. It turns out it's about the pattern. In the moment of the interaction, when you're in the conversation, the antidote for contempt is a gentle startup. Very similar. It's about paying attention to your own feelings, speaking about your own thoughts and feelings, and not speaking or not describing your partner's thoughts and feelings. Why is that the antidote? Because it turns out most of the time when we are being contemptuous towards somebody, what we're saying in essence is, let me tell you who you are. Let me tell you what you are. You know what you are? You are a slob. You are, ignorant. You are dumb. You don't know how to solve this. You're clueless. When we're doing that, what we're talking down to this person, but we're also describing the other person's character, personality, upbringing. We're describing them. We might even describe, I know what you're thinking. I know that you're thinking blah, 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 blah about me, right? So the antidote is to turn the attention back towards myself and talk about what I'm feeling. And it turns out I could say, right now, I'm feeling like I don't have much respect for you. Right now, I'm feeling really judgy. I feel like judging you for this. And I'm really struggling how to listen to you because this is very hard for me. That's not contempt. It's not fun. It's certainly not pleasant, right? But saying, I'm feeling this, even if I'm feeling angry, upset, frustrated, mistrusting, unbelieving, it's okay. That's not contempt. But contempt happens within a context of disrespect in a relationship. So it's not enough to just change your behavior in the conversation. What you also have to do is put some effort into building respect, compassion, and love in the relationship. Okay, so unless you do that, what's going to happen is there's going to be an erosion of goodwill in the relationship. So, like I said, the antidote to contempt is learning how to describe your own thoughts and feelings, not describing your partner. The last one, stonewalling. It turns out that stonewalling was the number one strategy that men used in relationships. Now, I should say most of their early research was with heterosexual cisgendered couples. So if you're in a same-sex couple, if you are not cisgendered, then chances are your way of describing emotions, your way of handling emotions isn't necessarily going to look the same. So I want to be clear, it's a generalization. But in the couples that they were observing, the most common strategy that men used was stonewalling. The most common strategy that women used was criticism. Remember that. Stonewalling, the definition for it is when one person stops really engaging in the conversation, when one person shuts down, goes blank, and just starts looking at the other person without saying anything, or maybe looks around the room and just, or is looking at their phone. My son told me it's called phubbing, when you snub somebody with your phone, right? And usually what's happening in that person is they found when they stopped the stonewaller and said, what's going on? They found that often the person who was stonewalling was feeling flooded. Flooded means their body had gone into danger mode, had become activated. They would flipping their lid, the mouse brain was in charge, and they'd gone into the fight or flight response. And actually, where I would say stonewalling is a freeze response, because what they're doing is trying to suppress. They're trying to stop it from getting worse. They're trying to calm themselves down on the inside. It doesn't work though, because guess what's happening? My partner is stonewalling, like this guy in the image here. I'm trying to say something to him. What am I going to do? I'm going to start saying, look at me, put your hands down. What are you doing? Why aren't you answering me? Right? And often what was happening in the person who was stonewalling was that their pulse rate had gone above 100 beats a minute. And that's a good indicator. If you wear a smartwatch, if you actually, on my cell phone, I have an app called Instant Heart Rate that you can use to just test your heart rate within 10, 20 seconds. And if your heart rate's over 100 beats a minute, you are in an activated state. Your nervous system is in an activated state, and it only knows how to do one of three things: fight, flight, or freeze. Okay. And the antidote for stonewalling, actually, let me just get you through this slide. This is saying what I already said, right? Our nervous system is made of two branches. The autonomic nervous system is the automatic nervous system, has two branches, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic branch is what activates when we're in danger. It's like the accelerator of a car, right? It moves the body towards safety. So it's something that evolved over time in order to keep us safe. If I'm going through the woods and I hear the rustling in the bushes, my body has to move very quickly. Way before I can think about it, my body has to go into an involuntary response and prepare my body to run, to climb a tree, to do whatever, right? So that's why we have the increased heart rate. The heart begins to pump harder and faster and moves blood through the body a lot faster. And with the blood comes nutrition, oxygen, and immune system cells that can protect the body. And under different conditions of danger, the body produces or moves the blood towards the center, so that if your arms and limbs get cut off, you don't lose as much blood, or it moves it up into the brain, or it moves it down into the lower half so you can run faster. Whatever needs to happen, your body goes right into that, right? And it also begins to produce adrenaline and cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone, adrenaline is the energy hormone. And both of those produce a feeling of enervation, energy, which can also feel like tension, anxiety. And it turns out when my body goes into that fight, flight, freeze system, when it goes into this involuntary stress response, it also does something called thin slicing. Thin slicing basically means that my brain makes a decision on the spot about what is important for me to actually listen to and take in. So a good example is you're driving down the highway at a really high speed and this car cuts you off and almost hits you, right? You're going to immediately, your body's going to take care of the situation by figuring out very quickly, should you swerve to the left? Should you stamp on your brakes? What do you need to do to avert the danger? And later, if I asked you, what was the color of the car? You may not remember, or you might say the color is red, but actually your brain just made that up. Or if I asked you what was the make of the car, if I asked you what lane was the car in, how fast was the car going, it doesn't care. The brain doesn't care about that stuff, right? So we can't process information coming in accurately. So even if you're having a fight with your partner, your brain treats it the same way. And so your vision and hearing narrows, your brain begins to thin slice. This is why the antidote for stonewalling is to take a break. So this repeats some of what I already said, right? And we'll come back and talk more about this if you need to. But you're going to have a lot less ability to find creative solutions. You're going to have a less ability to find consensus or validate and empathize because you can't take in information. You're going to see a lot more defensiveness. So this is the antidote. Identify that you're flooded, usually with a pulse check, but sometimes you can tell. You can just tell in your body when you begin to feel like your throat is getting dry, your tongue is getting dry, when you begin to feel a tightening in your throat or in your chest, or you feel butterflies in your stomach, or when you start to feel like your brain is in a fog. Different people have slightly different signals. Stop the conversation and take a break. That is the only thing you can do. And try to do it sooner rather than later. Often stonewalling creates more of a problem down the road. And because the recipient, the partner who's trying to talk escalates so that it actually makes the conversation go much, much, much worse. And often what happens with stonewallers is they stonewall for a while and then they can't take it anymore and they blow up. And so there's this sort of passive period and then an aggressive response. So let's prevent that. Now, when you ask for a break, it has to be your responsibility, whoever's asking for a break, to say, I need a break, not you're bothering me, you're doing this, you're doing that. Remember, criticism, contempt. Don't want to go there. What we want to do is say, hey, I'm not able to hear you right now. I am so flooded. I am so like my brain has exploded. I have flipped my lid. It's a great signal that you can show your partner, teach them. My mouse brain is in charge right now. And then just say, I need a break. And usually you need about 20 to 30 minutes for the adrenaline and the cortisol to come back down. And sometimes you might need as much as 24 hours. The person asking for the break should be the one that says, let me come back to you in a half an hour, or tomorrow. And that person is the one that has to take the responsibility to do that. Okay, I think that's all we got for now. I'm going to stop here and take some questions. So let me open up the Q&A box here. Yes. So you said the co-dysregulation. The answer is right there. If there's co-dysregulation, there can be co-regulation. So one of the things I say to my couples is, don't just take a break and walk out of the room. Because what you're doing, even if you legitimately need a break, what you're doing is leaving your partner stewing and sitting with their own thoughts and feelings. So if there's any way that you could say to your partner, can we just take a pause? I want to sit on this couch. I want to rub your neck. I want to stroke your back. And I'd like you to do the same for me. Can we just put on some music? Can we just take some breaths? Let's just spend about 20, 30 minutes just hanging out on the couch and just kind of calming ourselves down. And the most important thing when you're calming yourself down is to not keep rehearsing your negative thoughts. So you ask your partner to do that, you do that. What's going to happen is that both of you are going to co-regulate. And when you co-regulate, you're going to not only feel so much softer and calmer and more loving towards your partner, you're also going to feel more able to come back to the conversation. That's a great question. Obviously, you know your Gottman. So Gottman found that in master couples, when they were in conflict, so while they were in the middle of an argument, if you just counted the number of positive to negative moments they were having, they had a 5-to-1 ratio, right? So the 5-to-1 ratio depicts a relationship that's full of humor and love and compassion and compliments. So chances are that they're not also using the horsemen while they're in the 5-to-1 ratio, right? So if you're using the Four Horsemen, chances are your ratio isn't going to be 5-to-1. But yes, if there is one of the Four Horsemen in the conversation, it's possible to increase positivity to increase that positive side of the ratio and reduce the impact of the horsemen. What's even better is when you're in conflict and the four horsemen come up, is to learn how to do repair. And we haven't talked about that today, but that could be one of the topics that come up in a future webinar. So watch for that. Yes, Michaela, absolutely. Can you give someone this information to work on without being in therapy with this other person? Yes, you sure can. Now, it's a little challenging because people don't necessarily want to hear this kind of feedback. But you know what's helpful sometimes is if you decide to hang out with this person and say, let's watch a YouTube video. There's a ton of videos from Dr. John Gottman. And if we have time today, I'll show you one of those. But a ton of videos that you can watch on YouTube that talk about the Four Horsemen and help you learn about it and learn about the antidote. So good question on that. Absolutely. In terms of the Four Horsemen, now it turns out that gay and lesbian couples have slightly different ways of arguing and being in conflict. And Hillary, I want to say, let's mark that as one of our topics for the future, because I think that might be a really good topic. But in terms of the Four Horsemen, you're likely to see it in all relationships, couple relationship, parent-child relationships, co-workers, friends. I mean, how many of you, let me see a show of hand, have had friends be critical and defensive, right? So it shows up in every relationship. Bosses, exactly. Thank you. Lots of raised hands. So makes sense, right? I mean, the short answer is yes, absolutely. You can just have one of the horsemen, like one person in a relationship can be critical and the other person can be talking and communicating in a healthy manner. Or one person could be contemptuous and the other person's trying to talk and communicate in a healthy manner. Generally, though, it's very hard to do that. So if I'm being criticized, it's going to be really, really hard for me to not be defensive, right? I often say the only person I know who probably can handle criticism without getting defensive is the Dalai Lama. But guess what? He's not married. And so it might be easier for him not to be defensive because he doesn't have to deal with a spouse or a romantic partner. But I think it's hard. It's hard if someone's being contemptuous to not have a response, right? So they tend to go in pairs. So what you often see is criticism goes along with defensiveness. Criticism is a fight strategy and defensiveness is a flight strategy. So you see the fight, flight response. And contempt tends to go along with stonewalling because contempt is like an escalated fight strategy. It's a really aggressive strategy. It's a scary one-upmanship strategy. So the other person's going to freeze when they feel like they're dealing with contempt, because contempt often feels a bit like a verbal assault, right? Even if it's being said in a very calm manner, contempt creates a feeling of great danger. Yes, we call that the gentle startup formula. And I would absolutely do that as a way of setting boundaries, because you can say, I feel really overwhelmed or pressurized right now to answer you. I feel really anxious or scared when we start talking about the situation and I feel like I have to make a decision. And what I really need is to slow down, to have a little bit of time. I don't want to make the decision today. Those are all ways of setting boundaries, right? And the gentle startup formula can actually be a wonderful way to set a boundary with somebody. It turns out when something is unfinished, when someone feels like they can't let it go because the apology is not enough, there's something more your partner needs or wants that they're not getting when you apologize. Because, you know, and again, I think, Hillary, this is another topic for us to put on the books for a future webinar. There's so many different kinds of apologies. I'm so sorry you feel that way. Is that a great apology? Not really. I'm so sorry this happened, right? I'm so sorry you're upset. Those are all not going to be good enough apologies. So then your partner might go on bringing it up because what they're really looking for is something more than this apology. We call that a Zeigarnik effect. It comes from this researcher, Bluma Zeigarnik, who did some research finding out that our memories work in such a way that when something really bad happens and I don't feel like I really got heard and validated, I won't be able to let it go. I could remember it for 25, 30 years. I won't be able to let it go. It'll be fresh in my mind. And what I need to be able to do is process it. Sit down with somebody, hopefully the person that caused me the injury, to sit down with them and say, I want to talk about what happened in Paris. The last time we were there and you yelled and screamed at me in the middle of the Arc de Triomphe and everybody was watching. I just can't get over that. And then the other person listens. They say, yeah, you're right. I know I did that. And I'm so sorry. And then that apology sounds different. Absolutely. That is a fantastic idea. Mindfulness would be a great way to help create the self-soothing, but mindfulness also does something else. It helps people stay neutral, because the whole idea of mindfulness is paying attention to the present moment without judgment, right? So if I'm being mindful, I'm not judging. And it allows them to slow things down and put a pause button. So remember, I was saying putting that pause button can be very, very helpful before I move into criticism or contempt. Great answer. No, great question, Regina. You know, that's a good question. I would say the injured party gets to decide that. They have to say what it is they need. And that's often important to pay attention to. So I hope that helps. I know that's a short answer. We can certainly come back and talk more about repairing injuries. That might be another topic. This is great because your questions are really spurring me to think about different topics. Yeah. What I would say is if they're doing that often, what you might want to do is talk before you get into a conversation and just say, how are you feeling? Because that person may just have a really low bandwidth. We're in the middle of a pandemic. There's a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety going around. So people are coming into conversations with a much shorter window of tolerance. That's the word we use, right? For more stress and more something. So if that's what your partner is feeling like, then what you might want to do is say, hey, can you give me 5 minutes? If they know they have to listen to you for 5 minutes, I would even set the timer on my phone. I'd say, I just need 5 minutes of your attention. I just want to talk. You don't have to answer me. You don't have to say anything. You can take a break after that and come back, later today and tell me your thoughts. And that's going to be a much better way to handle that, hopefully, right?
Because that's your way of dealing with everything. You don't do it. You don't want to do it, you don't do it. It's like doing your chores. What are you doing to make the chore thing change? Like you want that to run differently where they do more chores. What kind of planning have you and time have you spent fixing it? Or you just keep telling me you want it to run differently?
So you see how she's telling him that what he's asking for, he won't get what he's asking for. He's saying, I want the chore thing to change. She's saying, you won't get that because you're not doing anything different. So she's blaming him for having a problem with the chores. That's what makes it critical.
What I'm trying to say is that you never talk about anything until it's crisis point and we're in the middle of a fight. Mm-hmm. You never bring anything up in a neutral territory when it
Whenever you hear words like always and never, assume that your partner is feeling criticized. Okay. Generally speaking, we hear words like always and never as if our partner is making a comment about our character. Okay. Defensiveness. right? We're deflecting blame, avoiding responsibility, making excuses.
Well, Bart, like I said,
But
it's
you're
not a
always
good
watching
time.
TV.
What do you mean I'm always watching TV? I'm working. Can I watch the news? You're always watching TV and the kids.
No, the TV's usually
I
off.
can't watch a little bit of TV.
Yeah.
Now, why was that? Why did he respond that way? Because he felt criticized. Remember, she said, "You're always watching TV." So he responds by blaming her back and saying, "You're always watching TV. Why can't I watch the news?" Right? So that's what makes that defensive. He doesn't look for, what is she saying that I can say, okay, fair enough, right? You're upset because I watch too much TV.
Is that
Honey, it's
failed again? It bothers me.
because money. See, money is so important to you, and really not that important to me. And I am trying to understand. I'm trying to somehow grasp how important it is to you, but I fail to get it. I just don't get it because it's not, to me. It's not as important.
It sounds gentler what she did, but it's still defensiveness, right? She's kind of batting it back. She's not really taking responsibility because he's actually saying to her, I feel like I failed again.
Well, I want you to know that I'm here and I want to hear.
So I don't know how well you can hear this. She's saying, I want you to know I'm here to listen, right?
Just listen. If you give me a chance, just let me listen.
Yeah, but a lot of the time I already know what you're gonna say. Oh, it'll be alright. Oh, we'll get through it. Oh, we'll make it, it'll be okay. Oh, I love you. I'm behind you.
Look at that look. He's not, I mean, if you saw this written on a piece of paper, you would think that he was saying really sweet things. I know what you're going to say. I love you. You'll be all right. But that's not what he's saying, right? He's mocking her. And mockery is almost always contempt.
Yeah, but you practically, you have to
I'm gonna give you an
start this little
attitude.
thing like, well, what do you need it for? Well, what do you need it for? Why can't you just be nice about it?
Again, more mockery. Mockery is usually contempt. So you know that that's stonewalling and not just silence because you can hear him tapping the couch, right? So you can feel the tension. And usually this is what happens in a conversation that hasn't gone well. It has escalated to stonewalling because in the beginning of the conversation, what we saw was that criticism and defensiveness.
Wow. Well, what do you want to talk about the money? What about you want to talk about? On the money part.
Yep. So it's not just the presence of one or more of these, right? If you have them once in a while, we all do that. It's really when it becomes a pattern that it becomes problematic. All right, everybody. I think that brings us to the end I hope that you enjoyed this webinar. I really appreciate all of you taking this time to come be with us. And I do hope that we will see you again in one of our future webinars. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lou.